I'm going to go ahead with the meeting beginning ritual now. 起立，面向佛堂，参加先鞠躬，一鞠躬，再鞠躬，三鞠躬，参加各位的传习鞠躬，开班一鞠躬，请坐下。Please be seated.
It's a beautiful sunny day in Indianapolis. It's starting to get a little cool and crisp outside. Fall's in the air. That wonderful smell of leaves starting to turn and colder weather coming in. And although this time 3 months from now I'll be whining because it's freezing, at the moment it's absolutely beautiful outside. And I don't have to cut the grass, so that makes me happy. As we prepare to have the masters visit Indianapolis and go through the Tao initiations and the preparations for the installation of another shrine, I think about things that sometimes don't cross my mind maybe as often as they should when things are just running along smoothly, and things really do, run very smoothly within the I Kuan Tao. We have an order called the Golden Thread that maintains that smooth operating order and keeps things rolling along in a friction-free and productive manner. But when we come around to some of these important events, and these are important events, it causes for me to pause now and again and think about things. I consider, for instance, the state of my own cultivation, my own progress, how I feel like I've done, how I measure up against the promises that I made when we installed the shrine, for instance, those sorts of things. And it isn't that I don't go through a life introspection process anyway on a regular basis. I absolutely do. But during these times, I give that perhaps a little more thought, a little more consideration than at some other times because of the nature of the activities. And I recall with a tremendous amount of fondness the dedication of my own shrine and my own initiation, and how I felt when I went to LA that first time and met everyone. It really was remarkably special for me. When I was initiated, I felt like I'd finally come home. I had spent years looking for the answers that I discovered here prior to ever having the opportunity or even knowledge of the temple in LA. And so finding Derek and the temple was very much like a family reunion. It was the moment in my life where I put my feet deep in the earth of the authentic teachings, where I took root, where I knew that I'd finally encountered the real deal. And there is so much out there that is not the real deal, that finding it was most comforting and really profound. It was something that changed me from that moment going forward. Knowing that there is so much out there that is not the real deal, and with these events approaching, I think it's important for us to talk about what makes the I Kuan Tao special. And this particular lesson isn't necessarily for those of you who are within easy earshot, most of you are at the temple or online with us, and you're here week in and week out, and so an awful lot of what I'm going to say today is not going to be news to you. But that notwithstanding, there are so many out there who don't know what makes us special and what the difference is between the authentic, true traditions and teachings are and everything else is. And so every now and again, either Derek or I or both of us will talk about this. And my hope is that someone who's either mired in what is not authentic will come to realize that and perhaps look elsewhere for their answers, or that someone who has no idea that the answers are out there might discover them, and in that way be brought to a point where they can embrace the authentic teachings and garner the benefits that come from this path of cultivating the Tao. We live in a society full of information and disinformation. The internet brings content to people in prodigious volumes, not all of which is worthy of reading and believing. And yet, when we look at the thousands upon thousands of websites and pages and documents, it can be really difficult to discern which of those is based in fact and accuracy and pure intent and which are not. And for a layperson without a lot of prior education in Chinese culture or the Tao Te Ching in particular, or the teachings of the Buddhas, making that leap in knowledge and critical thinking can be nearly impossible. Case in point is a document called the Hufai Ching, which is built on the internet as an addendum, a companion to the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu. It is, in fact, nothing of the kind. It's a kind of a poorly done forgery. But you can find 100 websites that'll tell you how spectacular it is to have this wonderful scriptural addition to the Tao Te Ching. Most people do not know the difference. Not because they don't want to know or because they're ignorant, but because there's no access to the information to tell them otherwise. Along with that, we have the ever popular, what I refer to as the church of what's happening now, that path of spirituality, if you will, that's keyword proficient, but completely lacking in substance. The spirituality of do whatever in the heck you want, because we're all going to die tomorrow anyway. And very often that philosophy of hedonism and wanting disregard for the personal bubble of others is passed off as some variation on a theme of Lao Tzu's teachings. That the authentic Tao has no rules, no discipline, no borders and boundaries and edges, no right or wrong or good and evil. Those statements are perversions and misinterpretations of what the truth actually is. There's no such thing as spiritual refinement without work. There's no such thing as personal progress without effort and without making mistakes and falling down every now and again. There's no cultivating the Tao teachings without doing some serious digging around in our lives. The term cultivation is actually pretty precise. It requires, if you will, metaphorically tilling the soil of our lives, tearing up the ground with a sharp implement to expose the nutrients and the richness underneath the surface, and planting the seeds of the teachings, and then pulling up the weeds and applying the water and the fertilizer and the care and the nurturing required to actually grow something other than thistles. In our political lives, we see conflict and debate and derision and just ridiculous rhetoric. And this year's elections are the epitome of the depth of nonsense to which our political processes can sink left to their own devices. I'm not going to tell y'all who to vote for or what to think or what to believe. That's your choice, not mine. But you switch on the TV and you can hear Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton beating on each other for days. Where does this further a cause of compassion or peace or even sane governmental management when the two people that we're counting on to run the country in some way can't be civil with each other? We walk down the streets and there are the horribly disadvantaged, the homeless, the addicted, the confused. And most of the time, people walk by them and don't even notice they exist. There's no sense of compassion for human need and suffering. And there's suffering all over the world. Yeah. People here in America think in some of our cities we got it rough. But they've never been to Calcutta or Beijing or Taipei or Bangkok. Places where the people are packed from one side of the street to the other. And sometimes the poverty is crushing and there's no social net, no safety net provided for the people. Then you add to that a whole pile of various and sundry spiritual organizations from the church of what's happening now that are bereft of compassion and any kind of selfless goal. And you have the makings for a real mess. It's not surprising that many have thought the world was going to end soon based on some of the teachings and prophecies from various and sundry authors. I don't espouse a world-ending philosophy myself, but when I look out my window, I got to tell you, sometimes I wonder how much crazier it can get. And in the midst of all of that, there are but precious few people and places that hang on to authenticity and truth and compassion and spread that as best they can to everyone that they find. The I Kuan Tao is one of those organizations. That's one of the things that makes us truly special. The way that things ought to be is the way that we not only try to teach people to make them, but the way we try to make them ourselves, to be compassionate and selfless and honest with other people, to be concerned with the common good of society and the world, and to be kind and gentle with ourselves and others. But those terms, if they're not couched in some kind of discipline and some kind of organized effort, can be largely brought to meaninglessness simply because of the magnitude of the problem. The miracle of what the I Kuan Tao does is that it starts with an individual and creates these altruistic philosophies and actions first within the individual and then within the family and the town and the country and the world. It happens one person at a time, quietly, almost imperceptibly, kind of like the movement of the tides. It happens over a relatively long period of time, and you don't really notice it until it's done. But when it's done, the impact was pretty significant. I actually like to watch the tides come in and go out, and it always surprises me how much movement occurs before you notice that it really happened. We know how things ought to work. Most of us would do anything we could to bring about an end to suffering in the world, an end of warfare, an end of starvation and disease. If I could wave my hand and make it all end tomorrow, I'd do it for sure. But the way that it happens is one person at a time. But because it happens one person at a time, each of us can help to bring about those changes. We can be an agent of that change in the lives of others if we're willing to apply what we learn and what we grow into in our lives as an example to others to follow. When we rectify and refine our own minds and spirits, when we do the best that we can to apply the teachings and to practice them diligently, the effect that it has not only on us but on others is far-reaching and profound. We rarely know what the impact of our words and actions are on others. It's not often that we're given the glimpse behind the curtains to see what it was that what we said or did. But just every now and again, we get to get a little glimpse of the positive power of these teachings in the lives of others. And it's a wonderful thing to see. As long as we strive for constant and consistent improvement, that example persists and that impact persists. And each one of us in our own way does what we can do to alleviate the suffering of others and improve the condition of others. By remaining humble and contrite, by not developing the oversized ego that goes along with some ways of doing things, we can remain approachable and close to the earth and helpful, and in so doing, amplify the change that we're able to help to create. Yeah. One of the things that I say very frequently is that we need to live the compassion that we say we believe, that we need to be a lot gentler on others than we are, a lot easier in our expectations of them, and a lot tougher on us. that we should hold ourselves to the highest possible standard we understand and give everybody else a break. That is compassion in motion. Anywhere where we can relieve suffering or end suffering or help somebody feel better about their situation, help them make a little progress, maybe help them to rise up just a bit, those things are worthy of doing. And all of those things collectively represent the body of the philosophy of the I Kuan Tao. The really cool thing about it is that everyone in the organization who embraces the teachings does these things individually and collectively. It is for these reasons that Master William and Master Chen are coming to Indianapolis. And they're doing this largely out of their own. One of the things that sets us apart from almost any other religious-based organization that I know of anywhere is that we don't solicit money from the laity, from the members of the congregation. The masters and ordained masters support the work of the temples out of their own pockets. But because they do that and because they cultivate the teachings properly in their professional lives, they do way well enough to be able to support their secular lives and the work of the temple concurrently. I have to confess I'm still working on getting that set of teachings right, but I'm not completely off the mark, and I enjoy the benefits of that knowledge. When I finally master it, I can't hardly wait to see what happens. People have said we're a cult. We're not. Not in any sense of the word. Nobody in the I Kuan Tao is ever going to ask you to sell your house and give us the money. To the very best of my knowledge, and I've seen a lot of temples, none of them are fenced-in compounds and nobody carries guns. Nobody is restricted from leaving. Nobody's required to stay. And nobody's forced in the front door. Everybody who enters the temple does so of their own free will, and they stay exactly as long as they'd like. There's no mind control, no brainwashing, no browbeating. Nobody even raises their voices. There's no real proselytizing or evangelizing. There's just nothing there in the way of coercion, force, or any kind of any kind of leverage applied to the folks who come to the temple. Not only that, but if you come and you stay for the midday ritual, you can even have lunch for nothing. That may not sound like too big a deal, but bear in mind that feeding a couple hundred people is not cheap. And in LA, they do that every week. It's a shame that I have to talk about the I Kuan Tao in terms of opposition to cultism and the negative spirituality that exists in the world, because it means that cultism and negative spirituality exists in the world. And it means that people get suckered in by it all the time. And those things are the truth. And I hope and pray for the day where that no longer happens. But until that day gets here, somebody's got to stand up every now and again and say, you know, I think we may have a better answer over here. I'm not going to tell you that the I Kuan Tao is the place you need to be. That's a decision you have to make for yourself. I will tell you that for me, it has made a remarkable difference in my life. And everybody who knows me knows that. Without me having to say a word, I am a vastly different person than I was 10, 15 years ago. That is the miracle of what the authentic and true teachings do and how they work. And so if you're someplace right now where that's not happening for you, there's a place where it does happen, and it's here. And if you're within the sound of my voice, here in a couple of weeks, there's going to be an opportunity in Indianapolis to hear the teachings and understand them, to align yourselves formally with the organization if that's what you want to do, and to know perhaps a better set of answers. I'm more than happy to talk to anybody who wants to know. So just kind of keep that in the back of your minds. And if I can be helpful, I will be. So I've had my summary slide up here, and I kind of didn't say anything that was on it. But there is one point here that I do want to make, because it is important. Everything our organization is about can be summed up in a philosophy of compassion and selflessness. It's one of the hallmarks of the I Kuan Tao. You cannot walk into an I Kuan Tao temple or shrine without running into a person who wants to do their very best to help you to be as happy and fulfilled and successful as you can possibly be. Whether there's one of us or 100 of us doesn't make any difference. I am here today because Senior Master Yang, Master Chin, and Master William in particular took an interest in me despite my rather rough edges and nearly complete ignorance, and helped to transform me into what I am now. You all have a tremendous resource in the ordained masters there at the temple. Those folks have been around the block. They know what's going on. They understand the teachings intimately, and they're more than willing to share them. Take advantage of that knowledge and of that wisdom. Use it and apply it. Let it help you. You can do nothing but benefit from those activities. And of course, if there's anything that I can do to help anyone, I am absolutely happy to do so. I'm truly looking forward to the visit of the masters here. That's a big deal for me. I've missed Master William and Master Chin a lot, and I miss Senior Master Yang every day. These are folks who are truly worth knowing. They're wonderful people. And I'm truly happy to be able to share with you. And as always, I hope that something I said here today was helpful to someone. Thank you all so much.
Hey, Bill, today, from beginning to end, no popping noise whatsoever. So I think the solution definitely worked.
Wonderful.
And speaking of the masters, so I just want to provide some additional details for everyone who are not as familiar with I Kuan Tao. So within the I Kuan Tao tradition, the ordained masters are known as 点传师. So there are 3 characters associated with this title, this formal title that they have. And let me break them down for you. 点传师, 3 characters. The first character, 点, is to point. So in this context, it is a spiritual pointing out spiritual truths, as it were. Sometimes that's all you need. Sometimes when you're lost and confused, you just need someone to point one thing out and suddenly the confusion unravels. Second character, 传, means to transmit. It means to pass on. In this particular case, it is about the passing on and the transmission of the Tao. Tao, the spiritual tradition. Last character, 师, that means teacher. So 点传师, if you put the 3 characters together, it is he or she is a teacher who points out spiritual truths and transmits the Tao. You can look at it that way. Bill, I plan today to talk a little bit about, my personal experience with Master Chen, Master William. You've interacted plenty with both of them over the years, so I kind of wonder if you can share some of the past interactions that you've had with them, some of the things that they have helped you with, so people get a feel for how they have been beneficial or helpful in your life.
Oh my goodness.
Maybe too big of a question.
I'm trying to think of an example I can get through in 5 minutes or less.
Well, as you think about that, I can also provide a little more information on what you mentioned in regards to authenticity. You mentioned 画胡经, so I should talk about that a little bit. There's all levels of different, I would say, different backgrounds of people listening to us. So I want to talk about 画胡经 because it's a curious point. It occupies a place in this entire Tao thing that's rather unique. If you were to ask the masters or the vast majority of Chinese Tao cultivators, hey, 画胡经, well, if you were asking, you probably say like an English speaker, and you might say 画胡经, they are very likely to say, sorry, never heard of it. Never heard of this 画胡经 that you are talking about. So, and yet, in the US, in the West, in Europe, if you look into the Tao, you come across references to this 画胡经, supposedly the continuation, the sequel, if you will, to the Tao Te Ching. So what is it, and why is it so little known in Asia, where it supposedly came from, and yet is relatively more known in the US and in the West? Well, 画胡经, as you mentioned, is a forgery that was written hundreds of years after the time of Lao Tzu. It was forged for the purpose of debating Taoists against Buddhists. So hundreds of years after the time that Lao Tzu passed away, the teachings of the Tao was widespread in ancient China. And at the same time, Buddhism had also spread from India to China, to ancient China. And India, the original Buddha, Sakyamuni Buddha, he lived at around the same time, chronologically, as Lao Tzu, about 2,500 years ago. So several hundred years after he passed away, the teachings became more widespread, and it actually took root and flourished in China, ancient China, more so than ancient India, because in India there was a pre-existing tradition of Hinduism, and that was so Buddhism was not about to take over um, that entire environment anytime soon. So in China, you had a situation with the Tao and also Buddhism, and many people, the highly refined and cultivated and spiritual people saw the two as complementary to one another. And that's still the way it is seen in I Kuan Tao today. People will study Buddhist sutras or the Tao or both at the same time, or to let them complement one another and gain greater understanding. It's a beautiful thing. At the same time, there were also people who saw the two as rivals, that they were competing against one another for the faithful, for disciples to gather up strength. So it was in that context that the ancient debates, oftentimes before the emperor, were staged. And at that particular time in history, there was an especially talented, a very intelligent Buddhist monk who found it very easy to defeat his Taoist opponents. So the head of the Taoist faith, if you will, at the time, was not that great of a debater, and also was not someone who really understood the Tao or practiced the Tao. So in order to win the debate, he forged this manuscript, and in the manuscript, he tried to say that Lao Tzu went from China to India and founded Buddhism there. So now when Buddhism comes back to China, it's really just an offshoot of the original Taoism, and therefore it is inferior to the Tao. So he wanted to use that as evidence for the debate. Now, this fellow was not that smart, and the forgery that he made was very clumsy. So it's got some passages that are very unspiritual, even offensive. Even the name itself, Hua Hu Jing, Hua is to change, to transform. Hu means barbarians, Jing means sutra. So he's basically saying that here I have a sutra that shows how we can transform the barbaric savages from the borders of ancient China and transform them into the superior ways of the Tao. So whenever you get arrogance like that, you know that this person has departed from the teachings of the Tao, which stresses humility. Now, the ancient Chinese were oftentimes very ethnocentric. So that was the reason behind a name like Hua Hu Jing. So the Chinese will say, when Chinese say Hu, they would append it to things that come from, places outside of China, and they would also sometimes use it in a derogatory way. So a Chinese person, when talking about someone else saying nonsense, a Chinese person might say, 胡说八道. 胡说 means to talk in nonsense. So they had a low opinion of the people at the outskirts of the ancient Chinese border and beyond the border. But not all Chinese were that way. There were also enlightened people who were not prejudiced. So when they looked at the Hua Hu Jing, they were horrified. They saw descriptions of Hu Ren, the barbarians, the Caucasians, the Indians, the people outside of China's borders. They saw descriptions in the Hua Hu Jing about how these were savages, how these were lustful, how they just gave in to their wanton desires, and that they smell really bad. There are several lines that talk about how bad they smell. And how they don't have sanitary standards or personal hygiene and stuff like that. Now, the emperor who looked at this evidence was one of those people who was enlightened. He was horrified too. He was like, well, this is really obvious. This is really transparent. So he gave the imperial decree to ban the book. So not only did the the Taoist leader at the time lose the debate, what he produced as evidence was banned. And that's the reason why, to this day, many Chinese Tao cultivators have no idea what Hua Pu Jing is. Now, the book was banned, the manuscript was banned, destroyed, burned, but there was a copy that survived in a cave that was sealed off. So, about 80, 90 years ago, it was uncovered and transported to England. So in the British Museum, devoted to Oriental mysteries, you will see the ancient manuscripts of that original Hua Hu Jing. And those offensive texts, they're all there. And they've been transcribed and put on the internet. So we know what the original says. And we know why it got banned. The reasons are very clear and very reasonable. So what is this Hua Hu Jing that we have in the West? Well, originally, one particular writer, one particular person of a Taoist tradition claims that Hua Hu Jing has been transmitted by oral tradition to modern times. So it wasn't passed down in writing, it was just passed down from one person to another in spoken form. So he translated that, he not a native English speaker, so he translated that into English. So when you look at that original English translation, you see that all the offensive parts have been taken out. And everything else has been vastly distorted. Basically, this Chinese author took the Hua Hu Jing and subtracting all the stuff that's very racist and added in a very healthy dosage of New Age wisdom. And that is the English book that you see today. Then another writer, an American writer, a native English speaker who doesn't know any Chinese at all, took that work from the Chinese author and put his own spin on it, threw in even more New Age teachings to mix it up. So those are the two books today that you have on the Hua Hu Jing. They actually sell hundreds of copies of this still right now. Are they authentic? No way. Questionable ancient origins, it's like a big con that's been perpetrated. So when people ask, I talk about it. But as you pointed out, Bill, when we emphasize the lack of proselytizing, I observe that as well. So if people don't ask, I just don't say anything about it.
Yeah, that's it's remarkable how much people don't know, and it's not their fault. It isn't. It's just how we do things. If we were out on street corners on our soapboxes, we might get noticed more, but it's really not our way of doing things. And so a lesson like this every now and again, hopefully puts a little more awareness out in the ethers. I don't know.
That's absolutely true. So do you have anything from your memory banks as far as Master Chen?
Well, I have almost 15 years of stories.
Okay, well, is there anything that you would want to talk about now, or maybe save until later?
In particular, because this is actually germane.
Okay.
You guys know, because I haven't made any secret out of it, that I've owned and lost a couple of businesses. Have not always been successful at running a business. And the second time I got ready to start one up, I actually talked to Master William about it, because I'd had one business failure and I was terrified of a second
Gun
one.
shy?
Beg pardon?
Oh no, I said you were gun shy.
Yeah, just a little. And we in fact we were sitting in my kitchen talking about it. It was his second trip out here, And he looked at me while we were talking about this, and all he said was, "Tell me what the worst thing is that can happen if you try this and it doesn't work." And I thought about that for a moment, and I said, "Well, I guess I'll have to go get another job." And he said, "Well, does that scare you?" And I said, "No. Yeah, I'm not a half bad technician. I can find something to do with myself." So I wasn't worried about finding a job. And then he asked, "Are you prepared to take the risk?" And I was. And so in three questions, he managed to clarify a situation for me that was really emotionally clouded. Right? I wasn't in a huge hurry to take another beating as an entrepreneur, uh, but I needed to do something, and that conversation provided the clarity that I needed to get off the dime and go do something. You know, it doesn't sound like much, but if you're stuck in a spot where you couldn't make a decision because you were vapor locked, you can understand where having somebody say the right thing at the right time can be unbelievably helpful. And Master William has always been that way for me. The the clarity of his vision is remarkable. The same for Master Chen, but they're also accessible and easy to talk to. Even Senior Master Yang was. You remember, you know.
Yes.
My first crisis of faith came in Taiwan with her. I can't believe I was such a moron, but you know, she taught me. She didn't yell at me.
She is pivotal in your life.
Yes, absolutely. I
So
can't even begin to describe.
this definitely answers the question that people have, Bill, which is, and that question can be phrased like, hey, what kind of counseling do the ordained masters offer? So I think you just answered that question with an example from Master William. And if it's okay with everyone, later on I can talk a little bit about my own experience, observation of the various masters as well.
Let's go ahead and do the meeting ending ritual, everybody. 起立，面向佛堂，持架三鞠躬，一鞠躬，再鞠躬，三鞠躬，持架规则是一鞠躬，接班一鞠躬。Okay, everybody, we are done.
Participate in the Tao meeting by joining us online. For information, go to Taoism.net/Tao